Built in the center of one of Europe's largest cities, nestled amongst the skyscrapers, lies a square hated by the many and used by the few. The architects claim that nowhere else in the world is there a square so relevant to its context. This essay will use Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle to understand one of Rotterdam's most famous public spaces. The Society of the Spectacle is often considered as a book of our times. A guide to an image-obsessed, confusing and confused world, it examines the spectacle, Debord's term for the commonplace expression of capitalist-driven phenomena, advertising, television, film, and celebrity. He constructs a critique on the dominance of representation over reality, the omnipresent commodification of all aspects of our lives through imagery. Society of the Spectacle was written as a manifesto, encouraging readers to truly recognize the spectacle and the society under its spell, to understand just how much we mindlessly defend, expect, and continue to build on it. What better city to identify the spectacle than Rotterdam, where I can stand in the city center at the intersection of a cinema, concert venue, and theater, yet be completely alone. This is Schouwburgplein. Built in 1996 by architects West 8, it can truly be considered a product of its time, a product of the spectacle. When the Society of the Spectacle was released, there was a new movement of appropriation of public squares in the Netherlands, with many young students protesting against the austere and minimalist designs of modernism. Instead, they called for a more human scale for urban spaces, transforming functionalist squares into spaces of recreation, with a stronger visual aesthetic to create a greater sense of place. Schouwburgplein, built 30 years later, uses these demands and symbolically corrupts them, using the very same austere ideology the students protested so long ago. The Schouwburgplein is also an over-specialized square. Its design intending to be a stage for the surrounding cultural institutions to expand into the outdoor space, but this arrangement creates a hostile environment, meaning that it can no longer ensure basic public space or agora functions, such as providing a place to meet, gather, or loiter. One could argue that public spaces themselves are symbols of the very way we organize our society. This remains true for Schouwburgplein, where its primary elements are advertisements, events, and street furniture. The floodlights that tower over the square are a representation of the massive cranes that move shipping containers in the port of Rotterdam, an artistic reminder to the industrial heritage of the city. A gesture to make the square somewhat interactive, they could be moved by the push of a button, perhaps a reassuring implication that the rigid, bleak square is still democratic, flexible, and individual. What's ironic and perhaps symbolic is that the sole interactive part of the square quickly stopped working and has never been repaired. The square is also physically separated from the urban fabric by half a meter, raised like a theater stage above the bustling streets and busy restaurant terraces. The architects intentionally wanted people to be conscious that they're stepping onto the square, into the limelight, self-aware. Perhaps this attempt to put people on a stage to be consumed is the reason why people avoid Schouwburgplein when there are no events. It is the very defiance and reinvention of tradition, experimentation that makes Schouwburgplein so special, and especially relevant to Debord's Society of the Spectacle. Instead of a church towering over the town square, one now finds a cinema, with its only ornaments being printed advertisements that adorn the bleak facade. The ads around the square market its liveliness and urbanity created by the many events held within it, creating a false reality of the square as it promotes itself and alienates the users. It's projecting the false vision of its success during the events as advertising, but does not acknowledge the void it leaves afterwards. Although Debord wrote his book 50 years ago, the ideas are eerily relevant today, although they've nonetheless evolved. Where once there was a spectator and a spectacle, there's now a blurred line between object and subject, collapsing existing dichotomies of work and leisure, paid, unpaid, public and private. With the advent of social media, Schouwburgplein no longer has to merely attract a crowd to be considered successful. Instead of relying on events, users are able to create their own spectacle, simply through the production of their own imagery that context is uploaded to Instagram and already appears alongside posts of the square itself, neatly organized under one hashtag. This self-spectacularization is what drives the square as a public space, where the aesthetic qualities and purely iconographic expression of the materials and sculptures become paramount. In a way, it's a social media square at its most efficient. There's no need for any extra material, space, or quality other than that which appears as a background to a selfie. The iconographic cranes and flying grass carpet serve merely as an attempt at identity washing, They serve no purpose other than to establish the city's identity, whose only value in this circumstance is to be commodified. These aesthetic qualities also serve as a tool to depoliticize such a square, so that it does not fall to the same protest movements as squares in the 60s. The committee that runs the Schouwburgplein only runs the events that are approved by themselves, conveniently leaving no trace of those it rejects. Thanks to its central location, however, political protests frequently appropriate the square, of course gathering little attention on social media platforms. This creates an apolitical cultural void in the heart of a city of 2.5 million inhabitants. Although it may only be through urban typologies such as urban squares that the faults of classical capitalism can be seen, it's also where it can be seen reinventing itself, using the internet as a powerful tool to maintain its grip on widespread imagery to eventually become neoliberalism. Speaking of neoliberal policy, it would be difficult not to mention climate change. Already a space lacking in greenery, sleek and cold by design, Schouwburgplein represents the modernist mentality with its capitalist system, hard-wearing materials, and emphasis on durability. Adapting the square, or system, is seemingly impossible, but we can't say they didn't try. The solution to such a monumental problem was simple: cover it up. This is the flying grass carpet, a giant patch of beautifully decorated, colorful, artificial grass. Designed to bring greenery to the square, it is instead simply a spectacle of sustainability to be viewed from above. It doesn't end there though. Architecture, through the proliferation of social media, has managed to reinvent itself as a commodity to be consumed through images. Projects can now be seen as sustainable and environmentally friendly simply through the imagery they present themselves in. These characteristics can be recognized in the Schouwburgplein. The complex problem of a lack of greenery is easily resolved by a simple solution, an initiative named the 7 Square Endeavor. The long list of private partners financing the project and providing their expertise, but with little to show in terms of results. Like many greenwashing projects, it relies instead on an abundance of imagery projecting sustainability with green roofs, solar panels and blue skies, happy residents, and their finely crafted renders. Even if there is literally zero information about how they would achieve their now expired goals for 2020, they proudly boast the motto of future-proof on their website, along with an abundance of computer-generated renders of the square's future. One has to wonder, at this point, who's to blame for such a public space? Is there a solution other than sweeping systematic change? The architect is the one who's tasked with interpreting the goals and implementing them into a physical structure. They're the obvious part to blame. Yet the municipality is the one who set the goals, budget, and established the organizational structure of the square. They, despite the square's reputation, seem proud of Schouwburgplein and the events it hosts. It's a case of designer, client, user, where the final design is not good for the user. In the end, who's to blame and what should be done? We've condensed our research into a situationist détournement, the juxtaposition of two different expressions to break the viewer out of the everyday routine of the capitalist world, uncover moments of truth using everyday tools. In this case, we've expressed many of our essay's points in the form of Instagram photos, videos, and memes, using the same tools as the Schouwburgplein for the exact opposite effect.